third year, I made the commitment in November to apply to Ryerson for radio and television, and to go into the radio station at U of T and see if I was any good at it, see if I enjoyed it. And the moment I pushed the button and the red light came on and I started talking, and U of T radio with probably 3 people tops listening, the moment I started doing that, I realized there was a place for me in this life, that there was something that I wanted to do and something that I could do and something that I could commit to.
Hey everyone, we're back at you with another amazing episode of the Hero's Journey podcast. I appreciate you all showing up. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss a single episode. If you enjoy listening to our podcast, I'd love it if you could rate and review. It helps more people find the podcast and helps spread the word on sharing our journeys with each other. So today I figured we were going to do something different. Usually I do an introduction for our guests, and I kind of wanted to flip things upside down. So today we're going to have our guest do his own intro. So whenever you're ready.
Well, I'm going to rate and review, as you just said. So I'm going to rate this podcast as, I don't know, how do you rate things? Like when you say rate and review, is it out of 5? Is it a 10? How do you rate?
Yeah, you'd go on to basically whatever your podcasting app is, if you're using Spotify, and there's like a rating kind of scale there you can use.
Okay, so I'm going to say the rating scale is 0 to 10, and I'm going to rate today's podcast as a 9. And my review would be this. Hey, Landsberg, I used to watch him on television and off the record. I never really liked him. I thought he was kind of a bit of an ass and full of himself, and he always thought he knew more than everyone else. Then he started talking about mental health, and, I got to admit, I kind of liked him. So I listened to your podcast today, and I thought it was really good. You guys had some fun together, and in the end, I feel like it was time well spent. So good on you, Vishaal, for convincing Landsberg to do the podcast.
Awesome. That is a great introduction. I couldn't have done it any better than that. So
that's true for sure. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I think we all know that. You see, that's me being an ass. But hold on. See, that's right there. That's me. So you said I couldn't have done it any better, and I came up with a smart ass. Well, no, of course you couldn't do it any better. I mean, who the hell are you? I'm a veteran broadcaster and a veteran smart ass, and you're kind of new to this, right? This is episode number 6. But you see, the thing about me is that if I'm kidding, then you would go, oh, okay, but he's just kidding around. That's the way he is. And actually, that's the way I compliment people, is to sort of challenge them in that way. But if you don't realize that, you just think I'm a dick, right? And you're listening and you're going, what a goof that guy is. So people can judge for themselves.
Yeah. And you know what, before we get started, I wanted to ask you, like, after all these years of being the interviewer and asking the questions, does it feel weird to be on the other side of the fence now, being the one to answer the questions?
It's not so much, just because since I started talking about mental health, I've been interviewed many times, in this kind of format, and also since podcasting became much more popular. There's many podcasts out there, none quite as good as this one. I have to say, this is the greatest thing I've ever been involved with, but I have been, doing a lot of these things, and especially on mental health. People will say, I have a mental health blog or whatever. Can I interview you? And it's like you said to me, right? You said, I'm going to send you the questions. And what did I say to you just before we started? I said, what?
You said that you didn't even really look at them.
Right. And I said, why would I need to look at questions? I thought it was really respectful on your part. And certainly for somebody who was in any way cautious or concerned, it's a really good thing. But I thought, oh, my God, think about that. If I've got to know the questions in advance about my own life, like why would I have to prepare for anything like that? So I'm going to tell you, regardless of what you sent me, ask me anything you want. And thank you for having me on your podcast, Vishaal.
Thank you for being here. All right, let's just go right into it. So first, I want to start off by asking you, how did you get into television and broadcasting?
You know, the best thing that ever happened to me was failure, was that there was nothing else available to me. When I graduated from high school, I went to the University of Toronto, and everyone that I was friends with went to U of T. My brother had gone to U of T and become a doctor, then a kidney doctor. It was just the two of us. My dad was an orthodontist. I only had one uncle, and he was a chartered accountant. So everyone I knew was doing something professional, right? So I just kind of followed along. And I think by my first class, like for instance, I took calculus in first year at U of T. Well, when I say I took it for one class, and I realized, am I allowed to swear, by the way?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So I realized sitting there, holy fuck, what the hell happened to me over the summer? Because I was great in math in high school. And then I realized sitting in that class going, I have no idea. There's no way I could pass this course. Unfortunately for me, there weren't many courses I could pass. So my failure in University of Toronto, after first year, I realized that wasn't very good. After second year, I knew that I was going nowhere. And in third year, I made the commitment in November to apply to Ryerson for radio and television, and to go into the radio station at U of T and see if I was any good at it, see if I enjoyed it. And the moment I pushed the button and the red light came on and I started talking, and U of T radio with probably 3 people tops listening, the moment I started doing that, I realized there was a place for me in this life, that there was something that I wanted to do and something that I could do and something that I could commit to. And that was like one of the most important moments of my life, was just realizing, oh my God, you know, I'm not a total loser. There is something for me that I can do.
That's amazing. I can definitely relate with you with that first year story, because I had a similar situation where like you thought you were good or okay, and you just kind of failed miserably, and you didn't, after that, you didn't really know what to do after that. Yeah. So it's amazing how you kind of found your way into it.
I was lucky. I was lucky that I failed, because if I would have just been kind of and I would have been able to apply to law schools or med schools, which I didn't want anyway. But if I would have done well enough that at least I was in the ballpark, and then failed to get into any professional schools, I would have been screwed, right? Because then I would have seen myself as a failure. I would have gone, oh my God, I didn't get into medical school. I didn't get into dental school. I didn't get into accounting. For God's sakes, I didn't get into chiropractic medicine or podiatry. Oh my God, like how, and I'm sorry for offending any potential podiatrists, but I was lucky that it happened when it happened, my awakening. And by the way, you know, you say you're just like me in first year or whatever. No one was as bad as me. I have had this conversation with 1 million people, and it's so funny because they'll go, oh yeah, you know, like it was really, you know, I was a really bad student at U of T too, or at another university. And I say, okay, well, let's compare. And I mean, I didn't just do kind of poorly. I failed out. I failed out of school. I got a letter after third year that said, you are kicked out of this school. Now, I will say this, saying kicked out is a lot sexier than saying I failed out. So let's go with the kicked out. I got kicked out of school and kicked into a career and into this great life.
That's amazing. How did that lead you to TSN, and what were you initially doing there?
So it was a date in November. And I was, I mean, this story I've told before. That's why it's so sort of fresh in my mind, because every couple of years I'll tell this story, that I was parking my mom's car on Harvard Street between St. George and Queen's Park. And I was going in to take an exam. And I remember it was raining out, and I was parallel parking. And I actually remember saying, you know what, screw it. I'm not going to go take this exam. I don't need to find out that I'm a failure. I'm going to commit to going into the radio station the next day, which is what I told you before. And from that day on, I worked harder at being a broadcaster than anyone I've ever met. Because I understood, I mean, I guess I was just really lucky that I understood that there's two elements that combine to make a person a broadcaster. Number one, there's your natural ability, which is, you know, what do you look like? What do you sound like? What kind of presence do you have? Just all of these things that you can't really change them. And then there's how hard are you willing to work? And that is the one intangible that you can change. And I just decided that, all of my life, I've been looking for some place to put my energy into, and this is the place. And I just worked harder than anyone. And I always had the goal of talking about sports on television. So I graduated after getting jobs while I was in Ryerson at News Talk 1010, which was like this big break for me because it's much easier to get a job when you have a job. So I graduate from Ryerson. I get a job at CHFI Radio doing weekend news, which was pretty fascinating because I had never read the front section of a newspaper in my life. I just had no interest in anything at that point outside of sports. And I worked there for 2 years, and then TSN started. And I thought, okay, well, this is really what I want more than anything. And at that point, there weren't tons of jobs in the industry, right? It was so much smaller than it is right now. So I sent in a demo tape that I did at a cable station. I'd never worked professionally in television. I sent in this demo tape thinking, okay, well, probably got no chance, but let's go for it. And I end up getting a call from a guy who was the vice president of programming. And this is interesting. His name was Michael Landsberg. Michael Landsberg. And he said, he said his name. And I said, okay. And he said, okay, so here's the deal. You never worked before. Why should I give you your shot? Why, I'm going to audition 10 people or something. Why should I audition you ahead of people that are, veterans in the industry? And I said, okay, well, how about this? Don't assume because I haven't done it that I can't do it. So why don't you audition me? And if I'm bad, then, tell me I'm bad and never talk to me again. He said, okay, so next Tuesday you come in and you do an audition. And I was so ready for that. I walked in there and I had trained for 1,000 hours. Wow. I was so ready to do this. And I did a pretty good job and ended up getting the job at TSN, which was this massive break. I was 27, even though I probably looked like 19. And somehow I got this job, and that kind of changed my life.
That's amazing. And I think if I read correctly, you start with Sports Desk before yes. Sports Center, basically.
Yes.
So it's called Sports Desk.
So I mean, that was mostly my job. I also I did events too. I don't think I was ever anything better than, it was okay. I was pretty good at play-by-play. And when I say pretty good, I'm saying compared to people that do it really well, I was probably, no better than average. But I got a chance to do stuff, and especially football. I did college football in Canada, which is kind of your not exactly the most desired assignment. But I loved it because football was my favorite sport, right? So I loved it. And I would travel around the country doing games on Saturday afternoon and then do Sports Desk a couple of days a week. And I ended up doing, what else did I do? I did everything play-by-play for all of the events that I don't think anyone was terribly interested in doing. I did darts, for instance. I did rhythmic gymnastics, the Canadian Championships. I did basketball, which I loved. I did men's basketball in college and women's basketball. So I got to do all of these things. I got to do some hockey as well. And that was great. But what I really liked was being on camera. I really liked looking at the camera and saying, hey, Michael Landsberg here. This is Sports Desk. And today we talk to you about the first and, whatever would follow that. That's what I really liked.
So for Off the Record, was that your idea or was that pitched to by some producer at TSN?
Okay, so the vice president of programming at TSN in 1997, he just took the job, was a guy named Keith Pelly, who became, the reason why I say his name is he became pretty famous in the industry. He ended up becoming the president of TSN and then left to be the president of the consortium of companies that did the 2010 Olympics in Whistler, Vancouver. So Keith Pelly was a guy that I worked with in the early days of TSN. We were friends. He liked me from the standpoint that he knew that I was a polarizing guy. He knew that, okay, well, Landsberg's that guy that some people like and some people dislike. So he thought, okay, well, talk shows, there's nothing wrong with being disliked by people when you host a talk show. It's not good if you're disliked by people when you host the news, for instance. If you're doing CTV News at 11 o'clock, people not liking you is not an asset. But when you talk about sports, you're going to rub people the wrong way if you're going to rub people the right way. So he said, I know you want to show your personality more. Let's do a talk show. We're going to call it Off the Record. And he had this idea for Off the Record. And so it was his name. It was his gamble on me. But when he told me what it was, I said, I got a better idea, I think, something that's going to have more legs and something that's going to be more impactful in the industry and something people haven't done. And that's, we want to talk to people. This should be our goal, who you wouldn't necessarily associate with sports. We want people from sports to talk about other sports than their own. And we want actors and musicians and politicians and just everyone you can think of that you would go, wow, yeah, that's cool. I want to hear what that guy's got to say. And we'll put them all together and we'll see what happens. So it was, and when I say that, there were others that were shaping it as well. My buddy Bob Makowitz, who became producer of the show, had a huge impact on it. But it was Keith's idea to do this talk show, to have me host and to call it Off the Record. And the rest was basically me and a couple of other people.
That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. And, when I was, just as you were talking about some of that stuff, when I was doing my research about you and your career, I came across this Toronto Star article, and the headline said, I was pretty much an acquired taste. And I found that very fascinating. And I just want to, just maybe tell me what you meant by that.
Yeah. Vishaal, I would say that, or let me correct that. Take two in 3, 2, 1. Vishaal, I would say that self-awareness in any aspect of life is a huge asset. And one of the things that I think, if you're going to develop in any field, you have to be self-aware. And as you get older, your level of self-awareness should be better. I mean, you've been living with yourself for, say, like, you're what, 37? You've been living with yourself, conscious of being, alive, as opposed to when you were like 6 months old or 1 year old. Let's say you've been, aware of yourself now for 30 years. Let's take it like that. So you should be more self-aware now than you were after 20 years. So I was self-aware enough to go, okay, I am a really good person. And I could back that up by everyone who's ever actually met me face to face. I mean, I've never been rude to another human being in my life. I've never acted superior than anyone. So I knew who I was. But I also knew that people did not see me that way, that there was people who would look at me and say, I don't like him. He's too cocky or he's too arrogant. So when I say that I was an acquired taste, that in a lot of ways is kind of how I looked at myself, in that, okay, I don't care if everyone likes me. My goal is to do a show that's successful and has enough people watching that it's profitable for the network and that I can continue doing the show. And I knew one of the ways to do that was to just be myself, whatever that meant, and to throw it out there. And it's kind of like, if you want everyone to like you, then there's a pretty good chance that no one is going to like you, but no one is going to dislike you. You'll just be in the middle. And I always said, I'd rather have someone go, oh, that guy Landsberg, I fucking hate that guy, than I would hear people say, I saw that show, but I didn't really notice the host. It's not a place for humility when it comes to your role as a host of a talk show like that. Your role is to entertain, and I felt like I could best do that by just being me.
Yeah, I think definitely being in the middle is kind of nowhere, right? You've got to kind of be on one side or the other. Right?
You know what? And to do that, you can't be afraid of having people dislike you, right? I mean, that's just, if like I said, if you're trying to be liked by everyone, chances are you're just going to fall somewhere in between emotions. And I think you want to always engender some kind of emotion, whether it's, I like him, I think he's smart or clever, but at the same time, others going, I think he's an idiot. Both of those are okay.
We were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but did you ever feel like you had to kind of have a certain kind of persona, or like when you kind of show up for doing Off the Record or for TV, or?
I think at the beginning, all of us in our careers are kind of modeling ourselves after other people, not even consciously. It's not like saying, okay, well, I want to be like Bob Costas or anybody else. But you are impacted by watching other people. And it stands to reason that subconsciously you are going to do things that you admire in other people. And again, it comes down to self-awareness that there is a pretty good chance that you will do, in my case, if I was doing Bob Costas or Al Michaels or any of the people that I admired, if I was doing them, I would probably do a really crappy Bob Costas. So I kind of look at it that you need to do the best you. Right. So I never cared if people didn't like me. What would have bothered me if people thought that I was not competent, that I was not a good broadcaster, that I was not up for the job, so to speak, and that I was falling below the standard that they would want. So I kind of at a certain point I just realized, okay, well, I'm going to be me, and I'm not going to care again how people see it, because it's really hard to be somebody else and do that job every day. It's incredibly tiring. And we'll talk about this in a sec, you said, but it's kind of like wearing the mask when you have a mental illness like depression. You don't show people what you feel, you show people what you think they want to see. And as a broadcaster, the same thing. I think you need to show people who you are, how you feel, and do it the way that you want to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It actually reminds me of a quote I had heard from someone else a while back, and it kind of spoke to this world that we live in with the masses. And it said something like, I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. I think I am who you think I am. So it's like we have this perception of what people think of us. And so we kind of have these masks. And I think we show different masks to kind of different people.
And everybody is like that to some extent, right? In television, you very seldom will show people, or you will never just show people what you're feeling on a given day. Because that's not what's expected of the job. If you watch a newscaster on CNN, if you watch Anderson Cooper reporting from Ukraine, he could be having a terrible day. He has. I'm a big fan of CNN, so I'm familiar with the personalities and some stories behind them. Like, he could be there and he could be having a terrible day, even though he's in a terrible environment, and that's to be expected. But he'll act the same every single day. Watch Lisa LaFlamme on CTV News at 11 o'clock, and she is the same every single day, but she doesn't feel the same every day.
Right.
She shows people what she thinks they want to see in her.
Yep.
And that's kind of what the job is.
Yeah. That's absolutely a great point. And piggybacking off this one, based on, with you being on Off the Record, who would you say was maybe your most combative guest? Like, was there someone who kind of went after you a bit more aggressively, or gave you a tough time to interview?
Those are the ones typically that I like the most. People would ask me all the time, who's your favorite guest? And I would say, I got to think about that, right? We did 3,800 shows. So it's hard to remember. Like, I look back at a guest list and I see like guests that I interviewed in 1998. And I say, wow, I forgot all about that person. So it's kind of, if you wanted an accurate answer on who my favorite guest was, I'd say, okay, well, give me a couple hours to think about it.
Yeah.
But what I really liked if someone was smarter than me and was thick-skinned and wanted to play the game of debating. That's what I really like, because that meant I could try my hardest. If someone was not up for the challenge and I challenged them, then I just looked like a bully, right? Yeah. My buddy Bob Makowitz in my ear, the producer of the show, would say to me all the time, if I'm challenging someone, quote unquote, going after them, just to make good television, not because I wouldn't like them, he'll say, be careful, don't be a bully. Right. Because then, no one admires you for beating up on the weaker person, but people admire you for challenging, Vince McMahon. When I interviewed Vince McMahon in 1997, after the Survivor Series, when he screwed Bret Hart.
I remember that.
Yeah. And I got Vince. I kept saying, well, I don't understand. You say you didn't lie to Vince, but you told him in advance it was going to be a draw. And then you go to the, you were beside the ring and you told the ref to, ring the bell. So I don't understand how you could say you didn't lie to him. And he said, well, I didn't lie to him, blah, blah, blah. And I go, well, no, I'm sorry. I don't understand. He goes, okay, I lied to him. And I thought, okay, that's a kind of a defining moment for me in my career. If I have the guts to challenge Vince McMahon, then I could probably do it with just about anyone. But here's why that job is tough and what people don't appreciate. And nor should a viewer appreciate anything, right? It's not your job. Like, you don't have to watch someone and give them credit for what they're doing. You just watch and hopefully you enjoy it. But the challenge is to challenge a guest like Vince McMahon about his world. So now I'm talking to a guy who is the king of wrestling, and I'm challenging him about his world. Same thing with Dana White and UFC. I'm pushing him to to clarify what he's saying, or I'm saying, no, that's not how you've acted or whatever. But this is his life. Imagine if you're challenging me on my life and you're arguing with me. You need to have confidence that you're capable of arguing with me about my life. Now, same thing. I would have to, if I'm going to challenge you, be confident that I can know enough about your life to do it. So really, the most fun of the job was to say, okay, do I have the guts today to challenge that person, that baseball general manager? Do I have the guts to challenge him on his life and his world? And that's what I like the most.
Was there ever a situation with a guest where maybe things got where they were contentious, but did anything ever carry over after maybe cameras stopped rolling or stopped?
Yeah, I would say a handful of times, but not much more than that, which is a pretty good track record. See, people would. It's so funny when a guest would come in first time. You would go through the show and do the show, and then they would leave. And if they were good, we would always invite them back. And sometimes they wouldn't come back because, they were, I mean, they wouldn't come back because they weren't available. Not so much because they didn't like me or didn't like the experience, because most people really liked it. So what I would find is, I would say 1,000 times, I heard when people would come back, oh my God, everyone wanted to know if you're a jerk. And then this person would say, no, I told him he's a really good guy. And he was really respectful and really nice and really down to earth or whatever. And they would go, no, you're lying. You're bullshitting. And it was like people wanted me to be this jerk. And when they found out that I wasn't, they kind of denied it. Nah, it can't be true. But people would say, oh no, I had a good time because you treated me with respect. And people who are confident in themselves really like to be challenged. Like, I would love it, in this conversation that we're having, which is not necessarily, mimicking off the record. You and I are having a conversation and you're trying to draw information and experience out of me. But if you challenged me, I would love that. Because I'm comfortable, obviously, with the topic. I'm comfortable with me, but I'm also comfortable talking. So people typically, like to be challenged if they are, super confident in themselves. But here's the thing, Vishaal, you have to know when not to challenge them. It's like, there's certain guests that would come on the show that I knew if I didn't have the same cocky strut that they have, they wouldn't take me seriously. And typically, typical for American guests, come up to Canada and they think, oh, okay, well, these guys aren't as good as us at anything except for hockey. So I'm just going to kind of mail it in. And then in the green room, my goal was to challenge them and to show them that, hey, if you're not at your best, you're not going to look good on this show.
Yeah, and this was a question I had. It was really more of a personal question for me, and you touched on it. Like, obviously, you go after someone like Vince McMahon. I loved watching wrestling in the mid late '90s and into the early 2000s with the Attitude Era and all that stuff. And yeah, Vince is someone, like, he is notoriously a difficult person to deal with within his own company. He's not someone easy to deal with. I know you've spoken with Eric Bischoff, another person that can be. You had some back and forth there, and I was kind of curious. Obviously you had people in different sports, but you had a lot of people from the wrestling kind of industry. I look back and, you had Bret Hart, you had Triple H, The Rock, you had Steve Austin, The Undertaker, Vince McMahon, Eric Bischoff. Was that more so because of how popular wrestling was at the time, or were you just a big wrestling person yourself and you wanted to get those kind of people on the show?
It was 100% the popularity of wrestling and the fact that TSN carried Raw and that was Raw's heydays. Those were the Monday night rating wars between Raw and Nitro.
Yes.
And so TSN would replay Raw from 4 to 6 p.m. on the Monday and Nitro from 4 to 6 p.m. on the Tuesday. So we came on at 6 o'clock out of this massive wrestling audience. So we found out the first time we had Bret Hart on the show on the Thursday of our first week on the air. Wow. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, look how many people watched. And listen to the reaction. People are going, wow, never seen Bret Hart talking about anything other than, wrestling. I've never seen him out of character. It wasn't the Hitman. It was Bret Hart. And we realized at that point, oh my God, this is gold. And because TSN was a broadcaster of Raw, and because I had interviewed Vince McMahon, throughout that fall where the Survivor Series happened and all that crap went down, and he, I guess, liked the experience of doing the show and liked being taken seriously. See, that was a huge thing. A lot of guys would really good broadcasters like Bob Costas, I've mentioned him twice now. I won't mention him again because it sounds like I'm kind of a groupie, but Bob Costas interviewed Vince McMahon and kind of played up it's fake thing. And Vince really, you could tell, just hated that. So even though I was challenging him on things, first of all, even though he did say, oh yeah, I lied to Bret. He wouldn't have given that up. Like, I got to be deluding myself to say that he wanted to give that up if he was pushed hard enough, but he felt respected. Right. And one of the ways that you respect people is to show them you understand what they're doing. You have prepared for this. And even if you're challenging them on things, it's still a sign of respect that you have gone to the trouble to learn what they do and to take it seriously. So basically he said, you can have all my guys. So I don't know, a couple of months later, we got Stone Cold Steve Austin. And like the ratings for that were insane, like crazy.
I can imagine.
I promised you, if you did a talk show at 6 o'clock Eastern time right now, for the next 5 years, and you could get anyone on the planet, you would never come close to the ratings that we got for Stone Cold Steve Austin. Wow. Because TSN owned the marketplace back then.
Yes.
And I have never suggested, oh, well, you know what? We were so good with Off the Record, and that's why we're a success. And other shows failed on other networks. We were successful in a large part because TSN was so successful. And people came home. Like you said, you came home from high school and you turned on your television. That's what people did. They put on TSN. So I never kind of fooled myself into thinking, oh, this is all about us, or oh, wow, I must be an amazing host. The truth is, it was the time for TSN. And in the case of wrestling, it was a totally portable audience. If the hockey audience, for instance, is not portable. If you tell people that, Austin Matthews is going to do a one-on-one, well, yeah, Austin Matthews is going to do a one-on-one next Monday at 6 o'clock on TSN. Now, and he's going to really open up. If you promoted that, you would probably find that you got a pretty good audience, that maybe you had like 70, 80,000 people watching. Yeah. We had 400,000 people watching for a Stone Cold Steve Austin interview that was playing on a holiday Monday for the 4th time. Wow. So it was like, we took the day off. So we thought, okay, let's play the Austin interview. And then someone said, well, he was, we already played it 3 times. Why would we do that? And the answer is because people will watch. 400,000 people watch Stone Cold Steve Austin at 6 o'clock. You could do nothing now. You could honestly, no offense to anyone who's Christian, but you could say, coming up on Monday, Jesus Christ will make his second return to the planet Earth. He will be resurrected. He will be on our show, and he'll be talking about who actually killed him and what was his life really like, and why did he allow himself to be killed, all coming up on Monday on TSN. You would still only get 100,000 viewers. It's crazy how big wrestling was.
It was huge. And you just referenced that because I was watching it again. And I remember that you mentioned Bret Hart with him there. And this is just going into the wrestling topic. And, he kept on saying, no, he was out of line, this and that. And he wouldn't admit that that he got kind of screwed, and you said to him, how I know? He's like, how? He's like, because Vince McMahon told me himself, and then right away his tune had to kind of change because now it's kind of out. And so it was a really fascinating kind of exchange that you guys had. It was a really great interview. I remember that one.
Thanks.
Well.
Those interviews, I get asked about them. Like if I'm walking down College Street, if I walked from Bathurst Street to Ossington, and then back to Bathurst and then back to Ossington, there's a pretty good chance that someone say, "Hey, Landsberg, love those wrestling interviews," because and I'm throwing that out there, not because I'm boasting about me. I'm boasting about the quality of those shows and the fact that I had two people feeding me information and questions. One was Bob Makowitz, a producer who was a wrestling fan, and the other one was Jeff Merrick, who was doing a show called Live Audio Wrestling. You can see him on Sportsnet now doing hockey. Jeff knew more inside stuff than anyone on the planet. And he would say, you have to ask Undertaker about the time that he challenged Shawn Michaels to a fight if Michaels didn't go back in the ring and do the job for Vince. So it was like, so when I said to Undertaker, hey, is it true that you would have fought Shawn Michaels like in the dressing room because he didn't take a fall for a guy that he was supposed to? He goes, how'd you know that, buddy? And I said, well, that's kind of the job here, is to find stuff out. He goes, yeah, it's true. You got to do the job. That's what you got to do. And it's like, okay, so that makes me look great, but I had nothing to do with it, right? I mean, that was given to me by Jeff Merrick, who knew all these guys, who, when we were going to go on and, interview Mick Foley, we could talk to him about Hell in the Cell with The Undertaker.
Yeah.
And, we could ask him questions that actually were based on things that people didn't know. So I was lucky enough to be sort of riding those shows, even though I was not the biggest part of those shows.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you definitely got to have a team. Like there's a team that kind of makes it all kind of go together, right? You got to have a team that kind of works on this together, and that kind of makes the whole thing kind of click.
Yeah, especially in something as particular. Like, I don't know how those interviews, how they evolved into what they were, maybe because of Bret Hart and because the whole thing was what was going on behind the scenes. He and Vince went into in behind closed doors, right? And allegedly Vince said to Bret, I'll give you one shot, hit me. And Bret punched him in the face, and he came out and he had a black eye or whatever. So maybe that's how these interviews evolved into, okay, let's get the inside scoop. But however it was that they evolved, it was gold. And it was gold because nobody else could do it. I don't mean host it. I mean, nobody else could get those guests because of the combination of our show being fresh and new, our show being successful, and Raw being on TSN. So it was like this perfect partnership.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so just going off of that one, you had also hosted the Olympic daytime segments for the 2010 and 2012 Olympics in Vancouver and London, respectively. What were some of your personal highlights from those experiences?
Well, I mean, 2010 was the best experience of my professional life by a mile. Nothing, and I knew it. And that, again, gets to be self-awareness. So I'm going to tell you something that you would very seldom hear somebody say. But I was given the chance to host in Whistler on CTV, which is a far broader audience than TSN. And I was given that chance by Keith Pelly, the one that I talked about, who kind of created Off the Record. Because he liked me and he had confidence in me. And still to this date in my career, he's the only one who gave me this mainstream opportunity. You see, something like TSN is not mainstream unless they're doing the Grey Cup. TSN, for the most part, especially over the years, has been secondary to conventional broadcast stations. Like CTV would get 3 million viewers on a Thursday at 10 o'clock for CSI, and TSN on Thursday at 10 o'clock would, maybe for an NBA game, would be getting 110,000 viewers. Right. So there's a big difference in the expectation, and the expectation on CTV is that you don't have to be great at what you do. You just have to not turn people off, right? And so people have never looked at me that way. I've always been the guy that you said, okay, well, some people are going to like him, some people are going to dislike him. So the fact that he said to me, okay, well, I want you to host on CTV, from Whistler, was like the biggest opportunity of my career and the most fun of my career. Oh my gosh, standing on a stage in Whistler with my family there and people walking by and my parents watching, knowing that, there's millions of people watching in Canada. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And the crazy part is I got to be myself 100%. I thought, everything's going to be written. It's going to be on teleprompter. I got to read the teleprompter. It's probably just, parroting somebody else's words. There was nothing that I was told I had to do. We got to create all of these things. Just like 10 minutes before, they'd say, okay, they're coming to you for a 5-minute hit. What do you want to do? And I'd say, okay, well, why don't I jump off the set here? Why don't we take a remote camera, go to the base of the hill, let me put on a pair of skis and talk about what the conditions are. And it was like, okay, we went and did that. It was like, I knew at the time I would never get that chance again. And I think I was pretty accurate in that. I never have got that chance again, but it's kind of like, what's your career highlight, Michael? No hesitation whatsoever. That was it.
Wow. That's amazing. I remember that one. The 2010 one was, I think just the fact that it was in Canada, it was just so amazing. Yeah. I remember on the last day, the very, very last day, it just dawned on me. I was like, wait, like I have to have some kind of Olympic gear. Like I have nothing. I don't have anything to commemorate this moment. I'm watching from Toronto. And I just kind of went on the website and I ordered myself a hoodie. I still wear that blue hoodie. I have the red one too. And I just like, I had to have something. I was like, wait, I don't have anything. Like 30 years from now, like I want to, even if it's all ripped up and destroyed, I kind of want to have something to commemorate that time and, where I was and what happened. And so that was an exciting moment just as a Canadian, as a fan. And I remember there was that one athlete, I don't remember his first name. I think his last name might have been Montgomery. And he had won the gold medal. And I think he was like walking with like a large like jug of beer, and he was just kind of drinking it and walking with like on the streets kind of with the fans. It was just like this amazing kind of scene. So
yeah, that was pretty famous. That was on our set. Jennifer Hedger was hosting at night. It was John Montgomery, and he had just won a gold medal in the skeleton. It was in my mind what we, and when I say we, I'm probably talking about 500 people, what we all did in Whistler and Vancouver in 2010 was the best television that has ever, or probably will ever be done in Canada. Television doesn't exist the way it did back then. I mean, now there's so many different ways to get your information, to get your entertainment, right? Yeah. Like television is kind of disappeared as being number one. I mean, most people who are under 30 years of age don't even have cable TV.
Yeah, no, no, they wouldn't.
I don't think you'll ever see an Olympics or anything on television done the way it was done by CTV and TSN and Sportsnet, but mostly CTV in 2010, because no one will ever invest the kind of money in it that you could do in 2010, because conventional broadcasting and television in general is kind of disappearing. And when I say kind of, I mean like right before our eyes. It has gone from a point where almost every home in Canada had cable television to the point now where there's many people under 30 who don't know anything about cable and wouldn't even think about cable and would never watch a show that was being broadcast conventionally or on cable television. So I think the audience is never going to be there again. And back in that day, TSN CTV was owned privately. So somebody could say, actually, you know what? Let's do the greatest television that's ever been done. And let's not worry about the nickels and the dimes. And if we don't make as much money as we wanted to make on this, we'll make it back in the future.
Yeah, that's honestly a great point. I think it's a different time, and it's people today are just with all the streaming and all that stuff. It's a completely different time. So I agree with you. So I wanted to kind of a little bit segue a little bit. You have a documentary called Darkness and Hope, Depression, Sports, and Me. Can you tell us a little bit about this documentary, kind of how it all came together?
It came together because I started battling anxiety when I was very, very young. My earliest memories are having fears that other kids didn't have. And I didn't know that there was an illness called generalized anxiety disorder. No idea. I just knew that there were things that scared me that didn't scare others. And there were things I wouldn't do that other kids would do. And as my life went on, I think I learned to cope better with that. And in 1997, for the first time in my life, I fell into, at the time, I had no idea what it was, this sort of deep, dark hole of depression, to the point where I was so incredibly shocked that this is what depression was. I had no idea. I mean, I wanted to apologize to everyone that I had ever judged before. You know, when you heard some guy had a nervous breakdown, and be like, what the hell's that? Like, come on, suck it up, buddy. We all have problems. And then I got hit by this, and it was like, this was by far the worst thing that I could ever imagine. It haunted me every single second of my day. For 6 months, there was no joy in my life. No matter what I did, nothing felt good, nothing felt right. And no matter what I did not want to be doing it. And it was like this awakening for me. And I ended up going to see a psychiatrist, ended up going on medication, ended up getting better. But because of the side effects, went off the medication, then relapsed, went back on, then relapsed, went back off, or whatever the order that would be. And the fourth time was in 2008. When I was really, really immersed in this dark hole that even talking about it now just scares the shit out of me. And in 2009, I'd never spoken about my mental health battle on television because I thought no one would care. They'll just say, oh, Landsberg, you know, he knows we all think he's a jerk. Not everyone did, but some people did. And he just wants us to like him. So he wants our sympathy. I just thought, it's not going to do any good. You know, why would it do good? And then in 2009, when I was interviewing a guy named Stéphane Richer, who was a two-time Stanley Cup champion with the Montreal Canadiens, I had read that he had battled depression in the 1990s. And I thought, okay, well, you know, that might make an interesting question. Not that I was trying to do anything good for mankind. So, I mean, this story I could tell over the next 15 minutes, and you would say at the end of this story, holy shit, that is an unbelievable story, just the twists and the turns to it. But you don't have time to hear it. Well, maybe you do. I'll give you the abridged edition, and I'm going to talk really fast. So we go on the air, and just before we went on, I said, Stéphane, would it be okay if I asked you about your depression? Because I read that you suffered from it in the 1990s. And he said to me, I'd rather not talk about it. It's very painful. And I said, okay, I understand that. I'm glad I asked you in advance and that you warned me. But if you'll talk about it, I'll talk about it. He said, well, what would you talk about? And I told him about my experience with depression. He said, okay, we'll both do it. So we went on the air. And as we were going to the third commercial, I said, Stéphane Richer, I know you battled depression in the 1990s. How did that affect you? What was that like? And he said, imagine a Canadian kid from Montreal, drafted by the Montreal Canadiens, rookie of the year in the National Hockey League, last Montreal Canadian to score 50 goals, Stanley Cup champion for my hometown team, the Montreal Canadiens. And I got no joy whatsoever from anything that I did in hockey. Nothing, not one thing. Same thing when I went to the New Jersey Devils. I won another Stanley Cup. And on my way home, driving back to Montreal, I tried to take my own life. He said, depression robbed me of everything in my life. And I thought, wow. I said to him, I said, well, you know what? I obviously haven't won Stanley Cup, so I've never had the kind of success that you had, but I understand what it's like to be robbed of the feeling of joy. And I talked for maybe 30 seconds about my own illness, and that changed my life. That changed my life. You asked me about the documentary. We did it in 2011, 2012, I think, Darkness and Hope, Depression, Sports, and Me. And it was with Stéphane Richer, Clara Hughes, and Daryl Strawberry. And the goal was to have people share their stories. Because I found out on that day in 2009 on Off the Record with Stéphane Richer that simply by talking about your own battle with a mental illness, you could change someone else's life. And if you talked about it with strength and without any shame or embarrassment and without sounding weak, you could get people to say, hey, if he can do it, I can do it. I never told anyone, this is what people would say, I never told anyone about being depressed. I never went for help because I always thought that just makes me a loser. But then I heard Landsberg and Richer talking about it casually without sounding ashamed or embarrassed. And because of that, I can tell someone else. And I heard from people saying I was the first person they ever told about it. And that changed my life. And that's what led to the documentary. That's what led to the creation of Sick Not Weak in 2016. And essentially, that's what led me to talk about this every day, because every time you talk about it, you can change somebody's life. Not me, anyone who's willing to talk in a raw, emotional, candid, open way about their mental health has the ability to create that kind of confidence in someone who maybe has never had that confidence before.
I think it's a great starting point for a conversation, because I think when we see other people, especially people we look up to, admire, and a lot of people, children, kids, teenagers, young adults who watch sports and they have their idols, and when you hear people being vulnerable and kind of sharing that information, I think it helps them feel like it's safe to kind of share their story. And I remember, I think Kevin Love, came out several years back and did that. DeMar DeRozan kind of followed suit, I think, with that. And I think it kind of humanizes it. It's something that connects. And you always think of, well, he's that sports person. Like they can't understand it. We're not the same. They have their own world. I have my own world. And I think it connects people. It connects the worlds, I think, when we share these human really experiences.
Well put. Yeah, Vishaal, that's really well experienced. That's really well expressed. I think that's the value in sharing. And it doesn't mean that somebody like DeMar DeRozan or Kevin Love or Carey Price, it doesn't mean that their story is more important than anyone else's, right? I mean, so what? You play golf for the Montreal Canadiens. It doesn't mean that your life is worth more than anyone else's, but it can be more impactful because the perception of weakness when it comes to mental illness, people think that, saying I have depression is saying I'm weak, that somehow I let it happen to me. And then when someone that is strong mentally and physically, when they say, hey, I battled depression or anxiety or bipolar or OCD or any of those sort of garden variety mental illnesses, if people see you as being strong and then you say, yeah, I've been battling depression for the last 15 years or whatever, then people will say, well, maybe it's not about weakness. Maybe it's just a sickness, and maybe I can talk about it too.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I want to come back and talk about a little bit about community in a second, because I think it's so important that we've just touched on it. But I wanted to ask you before we go there, realizing you had anxiety and depression, how did you cope with that all those years while working on OTR?
Well, first of all, anxiety for me is typically anxiety is not specific necessarily to things like, performing on television. I mean, I was never anxious about that because it was kind of like what I did. It's what I trained for. It's what I practiced for. It's what I knew I could do, unless I was depressed. And when I fell into that deep, dark hole of depression, I found it incredibly difficult to be confident doing my job. And, that job, especially the way I did it, a lot of it comes down to confidence. So I found that hugely challenging. And I felt like I was just faking it. I felt like people would look at me and see through it. I felt like when I would look into the camera, that everyone was thinking, oh God, look at that guy. He doesn't believe in himself. Oh man, that's pathetic. But we all, as people with depression, we get really good at masking what we're feeling. And as I said to you before, we show people not what we're feeling, but what we think they want to see in us. So I don't think my job was more difficult because I had battled anxiety and depression. I think everybody's job and everybody's life is really difficult when you have that. It makes it way more complicated. It means that, a half hour on the air energy-wise, probably with depression, is like 5 hours on the air without depression. That's how exhausting it is to try to assume a role and know that you can't be who you want to be. You have to pretend that you are that person. But I think that's true regardless of whether you're teaching, whether you're a dentist, whatever it is. If you're driving Uber, I think that with depression, that job is 100 times more difficult than it is when you're feeling good.
Yeah, it's the same thing we talked about a little bit earlier. It feels like you can't show, you just have to kind of put the mask on, and you can't show that. Whether you're a news anchor, you've got to show up, and you can't show that side. You have to show what you think people want to see. And
that's why my job was easier for me, because like my job, when I did start to experience depression, became it was easier for me to be able to hide it because I had learned as a performer on television that you don't show people what your mood is unless you're in a great mood and you're feeling really good and really confident. Then you can go on the air and show the joy of feeling that way. But when you don't feel that way, you still have to go on the air and show the joy that kind of way would create in you. So I think I was more prepared to wear the mask than others who perhaps weren't in the business of wearing the mask, as every person in television is.
That's fascinating. That's really fascinating. And
by the way, I did not finish that story. I mean, I kind of fast forwarded, but that whole story of the Stefan Richer show and getting messages 2.5 years after that show, I got an email that said, "Hey, Michael, you don't remember me, but 2.5 years ago, you and I corresponded on email. I'm Tyson Williams from North Battleford, Saskatchewan." And I did remember him because, I mean, these letters changed my life. He said, "You and I went back and forth and talked 5 different times. And I feel like I owe it to you to tell you what was going on in my life. When you responded to my email, I was in my closet with a belt around my neck, and I was in the process of ending my life. And I heard the computer go, and I thought, okay, I've written notes to my daughter and my parents. I do not want them coming here. I just got to do this." So I went to the computer to, perhaps prevent them from coming. And I saw that it was you. And I responded to you saying, "I'm surprised anyone would actually care enough to be able to respond to my email." Now, he never told me that any of this was going on. He just made me feel like he was hopeless. And I was trying to give him hope that he should go for help. He said, "I went back into my closet after responding to you, put the belt around my neck, and then I heard the computer go again. And I went back and I saw it was you. And we went back and forth 5 times. He said the 5th time I looked at the computer and said, 'My God, that guy doesn't shut up even in email.' But," he said, "the last thing you said to me was, 'What do I got to lose about going for help?'" And again, I didn't know he was, in the process of ending his life. I just thought he sounded hopeless and that he was kind of in denial that there could be help out there. So I said, "What do you got to lose? Go for help. Go to your family doctor tomorrow. And if it doesn't help you, then you haven't lost anything. But if it does help you, maybe you get your life back." So that was like a huge, huge thing for me to understand, that simply talking to someone was able to talk them down from what would have been, the end of his life. And again, I say that without bragging, "Hey, look what I did," because I didn't know it was going on. But the best part of the story is still to come. 2 years later, I get an email from him and it says, "Michael, take a look at the attachment. This is what happens when 2 people share, you and Stefan Richer." I looked at the picture, and it was a picture of him with his newborn baby girl. This is what happens when you share. And then fast forward, lots of twists and turns, all good, to an email, I guess, 4 years after that. I got an email that said, "Hey, Michael, I'm going to ask you a question. Will you be the best man at my wedding?" And so this is a guy that I hadn't met before, right? I mean, this is a guy that, we were attached at the hip only because of our life experience and because he had meant so much to me. And obviously I had meant a lot to him too. But, he showed me the benefit of sharing and how you can't shut up about it once you know the value. So I went to Saskatoon, then drove up to Prince Albert, north of Prince Albert by 1 hour, to a place called Spruce Home, Saskatchewan. And I stood there while he was walking down the aisle, in this community, no one I had ever met before. And I thought, holy shit, this is like so cool, so amazing. And life is kind of cool and amazing. And that was an example of it.
That's an amazing story. I think just the full circle and the connection, and just really what happens when you share your story. Like, you don't, even if, there's, for the many people who reached out to you, there are many more who will have maybe never reached out to you, but they may have seen your talk. They may have, heard about Sick Now a Week, and it may have made a difference in their life. You may never know it. They may never reach out to tell you, but the act of talking and sharing the story, I think, how powerful that can be.
I can't say it better than you just said it. So I'll just leave what you said. Perfectly said. You don't know what kind of impact you're going to have on people.
Yeah,
probably never will know.
Yeah, you may never in your entire life know that. Yeah. So, you kind of touched on my next question, and I'd want to ask you, what advice would you give to someone who, may not yet know they have anxiety and or depression, but they feel like something isn't right?
Great question. Really important question. And I have spent the last 10 years formulating my answer for that question. Vishaal, let's say it's you. Okay. And I say to you, okay, we're buddies, right? We did that podcast together, and, I think you're awesome. And, I got to know you a bit, and now you don't seem like the same guy. Are you okay? And let's say you deny that there's anything wrong. Are you okay, Vishaal?
Yeah, I'm fine. Everything's normal. Why are you asking?
But you don't seem like, you kind of don't seem as happy as you used to be.
I think you're just imagining things. Everything's fine. Everything's just normal as it's always been. Nothing's changed.
Perfect answers. So I would say to you then, I would say, okay, so you can deny to me all you want, but I can tell that there's something wrong. So I'm going to ask you this question and just leave it rhetorical. Okay. You answer in your head. But be honest with yourself, because so much of your life really depends on whether or not you can experience joy. And I called it the basic joy test. So Vishaal, think back to 2 years ago. When you seemed like you were kind of on top of the world, right? Like you liked what you were doing, you liked your life, you looked like, hey, there's a guy that really seems happy with himself and with his life. Think back to back then. What was something that brought you joy back then? Little things, not big things, because big things don't happen all the time, but just little things as you would go through your day. Is there something that brought you joy? And if the answer is, the answer obviously was yes. I ask you now, does that same thing still bring you joy? For me, it's a cup of coffee in the morning. That first sip, I love the smell of it. I love the taste of it. I like it, right? And it's not like it's like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. It's just something that brings me a little bit of basic joy. So my basic joy test is that sip of coffee in the morning. Does it bring me joy? And if the answer is no, that's a really good sign or bad sign that I am really battling depression. Depression to me is the loss of the ability to experience joy. So you can live a reasonably joyless existence, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are depressed. It means that, like you're having a run of bad luck in your life. You lost your job, you lost someone you care about. That's not what I'm talking about. It's whether you can feel joy when the situation calls for it. And so I would say to you, Vishaal, you think back and, are you still getting pleasure from the things that used to bring you pleasure? That, to me, is what people need to ask themselves and need to be honest with themselves. And if the answer is no, then you owe it to yourself to go and explore getting help.
I think that's a great answer. I think, asking yourself honest questions, you don't have to tell it to someone else. You just have to kind of answer it yourself internally with an honest assessment of, am I, how am I really feeling, and what the things I'm doing, do I find the same joy and excitement in those, or, am I not, right? You don't have to announce it to people, but you have to kind of ask it to yourself.
Right.
And you have to be honest about that.
Yeah, because people think, because of the stigma, people think that saying, I'm not really happy. They think it's an admission of weakness and that it's being greedy. And let me explain that. By greedy, I mean, it's like you're saying, okay, even though, I have a good job and a good family and I have advantages in my life, even though I have all of that, I'm still not happy. That's kind of like, well, dude, like, come on, like look at your life and appreciate it. But that's not what depression is. It has nothing to do with your circumstances. If you are worried about money, and someone gives you a check for $5 million, but you are suffering from severe depression, and you get that $5 million, this is a good thing. Conceptually, you say, okay, well, now I don't have to worry about, the same things that I was worried about before. So it's good, but you don't feel it's good. It's the feeling of joy that I'm talking about. And when you lose the ability, it's like when you have a cold, you can't taste the food that you're eating. It's not that the food isn't good or you don't like the food. It's that you can't taste it. Loss of taste is an example of something that happens when we all get a cold or the flu or COVID. As a matter of fact, with COVID, right? That's what people talk about. Couldn't smell or taste anything. But that's what depression is when it comes to feeling joy.
That's a great answer. That's absolutely a great answer. And just piggybacking off of this question, and I do talk a lot about the value of community and having, people around us to kind of cheer us on, but, they also help kind of redirect us when maybe we're going in the wrong way or need support. Who did you reach out to as kind of part of your community when you first were realizing you were having anxiety, depression?
Yeah, I think, well, for depression, for sure. For anxiety, I never really understood my own brain and how it had, it was not sort of normal, healthy fears that I had, because, there's times in your life when fear is the right response, right? No one's going to say, if you're on a plane and you drop 2,000 feet instantly or in a couple of seconds, no one's going to say, oh my God, you're screaming. What the hell's wrong with you? You must suffer from anxiety. Like fear is an appropriate and healthy reaction to some things. But it wasn't until my son was diagnosed with anxiety when he was about 5 or 6, when I realized that's me. And he had many of the same fears that I had. So anxiety, I never really dealt with professionals. What I did deal with was depression. And fortunately, I mentioned his name a few times now, Bob Makowitz, had been through something similar to I was going through at the time. And he was able, to say to me, I understand. And that I understand are two of the, that's what you strive for when you're a mental health advocate, even though there's no formal job. I mean, that's essentially what I am, right? And what you really hope to get from someone are those two words, where they feel like they're understood. And that was huge for me, where Bob could say, I understand. And I can say to people who are listening right now, I understand. I understand what it's like to wake up in the morning and not want to go on with your day, because you know that it's going to be a battle every single inch. You're not going to feel any joy. I know what it's like to lose self-esteem, to lose belief in yourself, to think that all the things that you could do routinely, now you can't do them because of your illness telling you that you can't do them. I understand what it's like to feel hopeless, like this is going to be me the rest of my life. And I understand what it's like to feel like I'm all by myself on this. Like, I understand those things. And when people feel like they're understood, it's hugely powerful. And for me, that was Bob. Bob, this guy that I was working with so closely, I knew that he understood because he could explain to me what he experienced. And that was exactly what I was experiencing.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think it's also having someone, not just saying I understand, but also acknowledging that how you feel is legitimate and not dismissing it. That it's, it's in your head, or, snap out of it, right? Like these type of words that people say, yep, that then drive us away from telling other people. Because when I did try to tell someone or people I maybe trusted, family, friends, whoever, I was dismissed, or it was, it's nothing, it'll pass. It's just a phase or a period. And then people, again, they go deeper into the shell, right? And so it's really important to have someone to say, yeah, like, what, tell me more about this. Tell me how you've been feeling. I want to understand, even if you yourself haven't had it, but just being able to say, what, I may not have had that, but, tell me more about this. Like I want to understand what you're feeling or what's happening.
Exactly. But the lesson that I've learned from feeling all of this, right? Like I often will say, I have a PhD in being a patient. My only expertise in giving a speech to 1,000 people in front of me. Why am I on the stage? Well, I'm on the stage because I understand mental illness from the inside out, as opposed to a doctor who will know it from the outside in. I understand it. And unless you have been through it, you cannot understand it. And people think that, I hear all the time, oh, why would you say that? That's going to alienate other people. I say it's the most important thing that you can do. If your partner in life, say, is battling depression and you've never been through it, I promise you can't understand it. You can't understand it, but you think you can. So you say things like, suck it up. And you say things like, hey, why don't you look at your life? Come on, things aren't so bad. You say things like that because you don't understand that no matter what you say or what you do to me when I am in a depression like that, no matter what you do, it's not going to help me. It's not going to help me for you to buy me a gift. It's not going to help me, if you say, well, let's go to a movie. I love going to movies because I can't feel better based on my circumstances. And that's not to say that if you have somebody in your life, and most people do, who's battling depression, anxiety, those sort of illnesses that I've been talking about, that's not to say that you shouldn't do good things for them. It's great to say, I'm going to do something, that I know, like you really have liked in the past. I'm going to buy you and bring to your house, this pizza from this local place. That's a nice thing to do for someone who's battling depression, but do not expect that it's a treatment for depression. There's a big difference.
That's a great distinction to make. So another question I wanted to ask you was, what is Isolation Nation 2.0 about?
Isolation Nation. Well, 2.0 is kind of like where we are right now. The talks that I give on behalf of the charity. Isolation Nation, I guess you wouldn't call it 1.0 because you never know if there's going to be a 2.0 when you're doing the one, but was the show that we created at a couple of months into the pandemic when we realized that people were feeling incredibly isolated by having to isolate. Not a big shock, I guess. So we did this show called Isolation Nation, which was an interview show, essentially something that I've been doing all my life because I'm off the record. And, we got good guests to talk about their feelings of isolation. And, the goal was to make people feel less alone. And we did 60 of those shows. We had 2 or 3 guests on a day. It was this, I loved it. It was like this amazing experience to be able to do something that I had done basically all my life, but to do it in a different context, to do it with almost no resources, and to do it without a boss, which is pretty refreshing as well. So we did those 60 Isolation Nations, and then when as hopefully the pandemic is winding down, I started being asked to give more talks the way I was before the pandemic. And ultimately, I kind of just called it Isolation Nation 2.0.
That's really interesting. I know I'm reading on the website, you mentioned you'd also work with organizations as well and that type of thing. Did you ever have any maybe challenges with getting kind of organizations to kind of take mental health seriously?
I think that the whole world had challenges. I think it was taboo. I remember when TSN was purchased in 2011. Was it 2011? Maybe late 2010 by Bell, formulating Bell Media. And I remember early on, this was like, so I had been talking about mental health for about 2 years at that point. And I got a call from George Cope, who was the president and CEO. And it was like, I looked at the phone and I saw it was George Cope. I was like, holy shit, why is he calling me? I mean, the president and CEO typically doesn't call guys like me at that point. But he said, I like what you're doing with mental health, and you're at the right place for that. He said, because I have committed to, and this was before they actually had created Bell Let's Talk Day. So this was just before that. He said, I've committed to donating, I think it was $62 million over the next 6 years, something like that. And he said, when we put our logo, the Bell logo, alongside CAMH and their logo on their building, it was the first time in Canadian and US history that any company had associated itself with a mental health cause. It was taboo. It was dirty. No one wanted to be involved with quote unquote crazy people. He said, but, I did it. This is him speaking, because mental illness had affected me in my life. In growing up, he said, my mom had been depressed and had been hospitalized. And I just thought, we need to normalize this. So I was at the right place. But that's an example of how little people talked about it back then. No one wanted to associate themselves with a mental health cause. And now here we are in 2022 when everyone wants to be the company that associates with a mental health cause, even though they may not believe that it's the right thing to do, but they know that it looks like the right thing to do. So it's changed dramatically since I started talking about it, not because I'm talking about it, but because the world has evolved. And I think the world realizes that people suffering in silence is way more common than anyone ever knew and needs to be dealt with if we're going to be healthier as a world.
I would definitely say my awareness, I think, especially shot up through the Bell Let's Talk. When that started and those commercials came on, I started looking more into it. I became more aware. So definitely for me, that the whole that movement of Bell Let's Talk and getting associated with CAMH and those things definitely brought my awareness to that.
I think it's been a hugely important thing because, in a lot of ways, it's just talk. So the name Bell Let's Talk, the real benefit hasn't even been the money that they've donated every year to different causes. They take applications for grants, right? And that's a really good thing. And there's programs that have been funded because of it. But the real value is just in the talk. is just desensitizing people to the idea that you could talk about depression. And the more you hear it, the more comfortable you are with it. So I think that, I've been lucky to have worked for that company that was committed to mental health talk when I was thinking that I was doing the same thing in my life.
It's gone it's gone a great way toward, definitely normalizing that conversation. And speaking of that, at the end of you have a video on your webpage for Sick Not Weak. And at the end of the video, I believe you mentioned a couple of affirmations. You had said that you had kept saying these to yourself until it kind of finally sunk into you. And I was wondering if you could maybe share some of that with us, those words you kept saying to yourself.
I don't think I can, because I don't think I remember what I said. Can you give me a little hint here, maybe? Just do you remember?
No, I don't off the top of my head, actually. I thought I was going to ask you directly about them, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Vishaal, do you know how much I talk? Do you realize that I'm like a talking machine? So I can't remember what I would have said at the beginning of this interview, let alone what I would have said when we launched the charity, say, in 2016. But, I tend to say the same things. They all stem from the idea that mental illness is a sickness, not a weakness. Yeah. And if we would all accept that, I believe the stigma would disappear. The perception of weakness is really at the heart, to me, of why people feel shame and embarrassment. No one wants to be seen as weak. And the way to get people to talk about it is not to convince them to share a weakness. It's to convince them that mental illness is not a weakness. So I'm sure I said something like that. I'm sure I said, fight for your happiness, which means if you are diagnosed with something like depression, you got to decide in advance when you hear that you are going to do anything to get better. You'll never stop. You will keep fighting. And that's incredibly difficult to do, especially with the number of failures that many of us have when it comes to treatment. You go for therapy, it doesn't work. You find another therapist, it doesn't work. You start on medication, it doesn't work. You get another medication, it doesn't work. It's so easy to give up at that point. You need to fight for your happiness, because if you don't, who can and who will?
I consider that's a great answer. I was going to wrap up by asking this last question. Maybe you've already touched on it. I was going to ask you if there was one thing you wanted someone to walk away with from today's episode, what would you kind of want that takeaway to be?
I think it would be that mental illness, like depression, and like anxiety. And, I talk mostly about depression and anxiety, but more depression because it's what I know the best. But also depression and anxiety are the two most common mental health challenges that we have. So more people can relate to that. But also I stay in my own lane, right? It's like I don't talk about things I don't know about. I don't ever offer advice that is kind of what should come from a doctor. My advice is that you need to think about yourself. You need to think about your life. You need to think about the idea of experiencing joy. And if you come to the conclusion that you're not good, that you're not right, that you have changed, because for me, it was like I had been replaced by somebody else, and who I was, I did not want to be, and I did not like. And that is no way to go through your life. And if you go for help and commit to getting help, I talked to a psychiatrist yesterday, and she said, almost every patient that comes to me, if they will stick with it long enough, will find treatment that works for them. Not to cure their illness, like I'm not cured, but will give them back their life enough that they can enjoy their life. And I just plead with people, don't waste your life on your illness. And if you are not who you were, then you need to acknowledge that, and you need to chase the help and get back to simply having the ability to experience joy, which when you take it out of your life, really takes away the best reason for getting out of bed.
I think that's really well said. And, I just want to thank you for, again, being such a great guest, but also just being so open and vulnerable about your journey, not just from, your broadcasting career, but just with the battles with mental health. And, I think it bears repeating that you've said it, that, mental health, it's not a weakness. No one chooses to have anxiety, depression. It kind of chooses you. And it's so important to know that, one, you're not alone. You're not the only one suffering. And two is to kind of, reach out, get support, find that community. And like I said, Sick Not Weak is a great resource for that. And I strongly urge anyone who's interested to take a look at the website for resources and support. And if you don't already follow Michael, I'd strongly recommend you do that. Where could people find and connect with you online?
Twitter at Hey Landsberg, also at Sick Not Weak. Same thing on Instagram. SickNotWeak.com is our website, and on Facebook, we are Sick Not Weak. And I don't look at it as a business, so it's not like I'm trying to drum up support. I just know that what we have to offer, and in fact, what anyone has to offer who has life experience, who's willing to share it, can and will make a difference in somebody's life.
That's great. That's wonderful. So guys, there you have it. That wraps up another episode of the Hero's Journey podcast. Looking forward to seeing you all again soon. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and obviously rate and review, as it would mean so much to me. Take care, everyone.